Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt your chest tighten around certain people, as if their very presence were draining the oxygen from your lungs? Your pulse quickens when they speak. Your shoulders carry invisible weight when they enter your space, yet outwardly you smile and pretend everything is perfectly normal. Meanwhile, your body screams warnings that your rational mind dismisses as oversensitivity. You are not imagining this crushing sensation in your ribcage. You are not being dramatic when your stomach clenches during family gatherings or work meetings. You are not losing your mind when specific individuals seem to possess an uncanny ability to destabilize your emotional equilibrium within minutes. What you are experiencing is your nervous system responding to psychological dynamics that operate far beneath the surface of conscious awareness. Carl Jung spent decades studying this invisible force field between human beings, discovering that our most intense reactions to others reveal hidden territories within our own psyche that we have never learned to navigate. Your body knows something your mind has not yet understood about the intricate dance between your inner world and the people who surround you. Jung uncovered a revolutionary principle that explains why certain individuals can shatter your peace with a single glance while others leave you feeling mysteriously strengthened by their mere presence. But here is what Jung discovered that changes everything. The person who disturbs you most profoundly is actually holding the key to your greatest psychological freedom. What is this hidden mechanism that transforms your most triggering relationships into doorways of liberation? There exists within human consciousness a peculiar phenomenon that most individuals remain unaware of throughout their entire existence, a psychological mirror that reflects not the external world but the hidden territories of their own psyche. When you encounter someone who radiates an unshakable presence, someone whose emotional equilibrium remains undisturbed regardless of the chaos surrounding them, you are witnessing a person who has discovered this fundamental truth about human nature. The majority of humanity lives in a constant state of psychological reactivity, their inner weather changing with every external stimulus, like leaves trembling in the wind. A harsh word from a stranger sends ripples of anger through their nervous system. A disapproving glance activates dormant insecurities that have been lying in wait beneath the surface of consciousness. An unexpected setback transforms their entire emotional landscape into a battlefield of frustration and despair. Yet there are those rare individuals who seem to possess an inner fortress, impervious to these same psychological storms. What separates these two types of human beings is not circumstances, genetics, or luck, but rather their relationship with what the great psychologist Carl Jung termed the shadow. That aspect of personality, which contains all the elements we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. Jung observed through decades of clinical work that external events possess no inherent power to disturb our psychological equilibrium. The disturbance arises not from what happens to us, but from what these events activate within the unconscious layers of our personality. Consider this revolutionary insight. When someone insults your intelligence and you feel a surge of indignation coursing through your body, the emotional charge does not originate from their words, but from an unresolved doubt about your own mental capabilities that already existed in the shadows of your psyche. When criticism strikes you like a physical blow, it is because this criticism has found fertile ground in your unconscious fears and self-doubts. The external trigger merely illuminates what was already present in the darkness. This is why identical situations produce completely different responses in different individuals. One person receives harsh feedback and uses it as fuel for self-improvement, while another person crumbles under the weight of the same words. The difference lies not in the feedback itself, but in the internal psychological landscape it encounters. Jung discovered that every emotional trigger in our external environment corresponds to an unintegrated aspect of our shadow self. The colleague who irritates you beyond reason mirrors qualities you possess, but refuse to acknowledge. The behavior that disgusts you in others often reflects tendencies you have banished from your conscious self-image. This is what Jung called projection. the unconscious process by which we cast our own unacknowledged traits onto the world around us. Most people spend their lives running from these psychological mirrors, blaming external circumstances for their internal turmoil, constructing elaborate explanations for why the world seems to conspire against their peace of mind. They become prisoners of their own projections, living in a reality shaped more by their unconscious fears than by objective circumstances. But those who achieve true psychological mastery understand that the path to inner freedom begins with withdrawing these projections. Instead of pointing fingers at the external world, they turn their attention inward, asking themselves what aspect of their own personality is being reflected back to them. This process requires tremendous courage because it demands that we face the parts of ourselves we have spent years trying to avoid. Jung called this confrontation with the shadow one of the most difficult tasks in human psychological development. It requires us to acknowledge that we contain within ourselves the same human frailties we criticize in others. We must accept that our capacity for selfishness, cruelty, weakness, and ignorance is not fundamentally different from that of any other human being. This acceptance paradoxically becomes the foundation of true psychological strength. When you no longer need to maintain an idealized self-image, you become immune to attacks on your character. When you have acknowledged your own capacity for failure, setbacks lose their power to devastate you. When you have embraced your own humanity in its entirety, the judgments of others can no longer shake your core. The process of shadow integration transforms your relationship with the external world in profound ways. People who once had the power to disturb your emotional equilibrium suddenly seem less threatening. Situations that previously generated anxiety or anger begin to feel neutral, like weather patterns that simply exist without requiring any emotional investment from you. This transformation occurs because you have reclaimed the psychological energy that was previously tied up in maintaining unconscious projections. If this exploration of Jung's revolutionary insights resonates with your own inner experience, take a moment right now to give strength to this channel by clicking the subscribing button, like, and activating the notification bell so you never miss these deep dives into the human psyche. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these transformative psychological concepts to light. The development of this inner immunity to external disturbance is not about becoming emotionally numb or disconnected from human experience. Rather, it involves cultivating what Jung called conscious awareness, the ability to observe your internal psychological processes without being completely identified with them. When anger arises, instead of immediately acting on this emotion, you develop the capacity to witness it with curiosity. When fear appears in your consciousness, rather than being overwhelmed by it, you can examine it like a scientist studying an interesting phenomenon. This observer consciousness creates space between you and your emotional reactions, allowing you to choose your responses rather than being driven by unconscious impulses. Most people remain trapped in automatic psychological patterns established in childhood, reacting to present circumstances through the lens of past wounds and unresolved conflicts. They live their entire lives as prisoners of their own unconscious programming, never realizing that they have the power to step outside these patterns and observe them objectively. The cultivation of observer consciousness requires daily practice and sustained attention. It means catching yourself in those moments when your emotional equilibrium becomes disturbed and asking the crucial question, what within me is being activated right now? Instead of immediately seeking to blame external circumstances, you pause and investigate the internal landscape. What fear is being triggered? What insecurity is being exposed? What aspect of your shadow is demanding attention? This shift from external blame to internal exploration fundamentally changes your relationship with difficulty and challenge. Problems become opportunities for greater self-understanding rather than evidence of an unfair universe. Conflicts reveal hidden aspects of your personality rather than proving other people are unreasonable. Setbacks illuminate areas where you still need to develop psychological maturity rather than demonstrating that success is impossible. Jung understood that this process of turning inward is not narcissistic self-absorption, but rather the foundation of genuine wisdom and compassion. When you truly understand the depths of your own psychological complexity, you naturally develop empathy for the struggles of others. When you have faced your own capacity for selfishness and cruelty, you become less judgmental of human weakness. When you have witnessed your own fears and insecurities, you can meet others with understanding rather than criticism. This inner work also reveals what Jung called the self, the deeper organizing principle within the psyche that transcends the limited perspective of the ego. The ego represents our conscious sense of identity, our story about who we are and what we want. The self encompasses both conscious and unconscious elements, including all the disowned aspects of personality that we have relegated to the shadow. Integration of shadow material allows the ego to align more closely with this deeper self, creating a sense of wholeness and authenticity that cannot be shaken by external circumstances. People operating from this integrated state possess a quality that Jung called unassailable presence. They are not trying to prove anything to anyone because they have already accepted themselves completely. They are not defending against criticism because they have already acknowledged their own imperfections. They are not seeking approval from others because they have learned to validate themselves from within. This does not mean they become isolated or uncaring about others' opinions. Rather, they develop the capacity to receive feedback without being destabilized by it, to form relationships without losing themselves in them, to pursue goals without being devastated by temporary failures. Their emotional center of gravity shifts from external validation to internal wisdom. The practical applications of these psychological insights extend into every area of human experience, creating ripple effects that transform not only individual consciousness, but entire relationship dynamics. When you stop projecting your unresolved material onto others, they often respond by dropping their own defensive patterns, creating space for authentic connection. When you cease reacting automatically to triggering behaviors, you interrupt unconscious cycles that may have been perpetuating conflict for years. In intimate relationships, this shift is particularly profound because romantic partnerships naturally constellate our deepest shadow material. The person we love most intensely often becomes the repository for our most unconscious projections, which is why intimate relationships can feel simultaneously like heaven and hell. Jung observed that couples who learn to recognize and withdraw their projections from each other discover a love that transcends the initial romantic fantasy. This mature love is based on seeing and accepting the actual person, rather than the idealized image they carried in their unconscious. In professional contexts, shadow integration creates leaders who can receive criticism without becoming defensive, who can make decisions without being paralyzed by the fear of making mistakes, who can delegate authority without feeling threatened by others' competence. These individuals naturally attract opportunities because they radiate the confidence that comes from self-acceptance, rather than the anxiety that accompanies constant self-protection. In your career, you stop blaming circumstances for your lack of progress and start taking responsibility for the internal barriers that limit your effectiveness. In your daily interactions, you stop taking things personally and start seeing other people's behavior as a reflection of their own internal struggles rather than as attacks on your character. The cultivation of this inner immunity extends beyond personal relationships into your relationship with success and failure themselves. Most people remain trapped on an emotional roller coaster, celebrating wildly when things go well, and crashing into despair when circumstances become challenging. But individuals who have integrated significant shadow material develop what Jung called equanimity, a balanced response to both triumph and disaster. They understand that external circumstances are temporary and fluctuating, while their inner sense of worth remains constant regardless of what unfolds in the material world. This shift in perception creates extraordinary freedom. You are no longer at the mercy of other people's moods, opinions, or actions. You are no longer waiting for external circumstances to align perfectly before you can experience inner peace. You are no longer dependent on constant positive feedback to maintain your sense of self-worth. Instead, you discover that the source of psychological stability and contentment was always within you, waiting to be accessed through the courage to face your own shadow and integrate all aspects of your humanity. Jung spent his lifetime mapping these inner territories of the human psyche, providing us with a roadmap for psychological liberation that remains as relevant today as it was a century ago. The journey from reactive unconsciousness to integrated awareness represents perhaps the greatest adventure available to human beings, an exploration of inner space that yields treasures far more valuable than any external achievement. Every moment of difficulty becomes an invitation to deepen this self-knowledge. Every person who triggers your emotions becomes a teacher, showing you aspects of yourself that still need integration. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to practice responding from conscious choice rather than unconscious reaction. This is the path Jung illuminated for those brave enough to walk it, the road that leads from psychological bondage to authentic freedom, from reactive living to conscious mastery, from the prison of projection to the liberation of self-knowledge.